as always, nothing new for us. That's just kind of what CPI does. We're at the center when stuff is happening, the Center for Political Innovation, our organization. We're at the center of stuff happening. One of our friends, Dan Kovalik, is a lawyer. Dan Kovalik is a longtime friend of CPI. I hung out with him in Russia when he was in Russia for the elections, monitoring, and in 2024, the Russian election that happened. I hung out with him in Nicaragua when we were in Nicaragua. I've hung out with Dan many times. Brilliant guy, great lawyer from Pittsburgh. Dan Kovalik was on CNN today to talk about an important lawsuit. And so we're going to start out. This will be our first clip we watch tonight. This is on CNN, right? The pro-imperialist. It's basically the U.S. government propaganda channel. It's technically private, but it's basically sponsored by the government. They show it in the airports. They regurgitate U.S. foreign policy propaganda. But Dan Kovalik is involved in an important legal case, and so he appeared on CNN, and we're going to watch the clip. Here we go. Dan Kovalik.
First known formal complaint is now filed over a deadly U.S. strike in the Caribbean. The family of a Colombian fisherman, Alejandro Carranza, says he was killed in this September 15th strike that you're seeing on your screen. They want compensation and an end to these killings. Their attorney, Dan Kovalik, is joining us right now. First of all, what are you seeking in this petition against the United States officials?
Well, as you mentioned, the family, of course, wants compensation. They've lost their chief breadwinner. By the way, he earned his money by being a fisherman. He was out fishing for marlin and tuna when he was killed. But the other thing they want equally is to end these killings. They want to deter the United States from continuing to do this in the future.
The Trump administration has gone very hard on those in these boats. We've talked to many different lawmakers who have yet to see the evidence that they are narco-terrorists or drug traffickers, but that is what the administration is saying that they are. What is the evidence that you will use to show that your client is not that your client, as you say, is a fisherman?
Well, first of all, the onus is not on us to prove he was innocent. It's on them to prove he was guilty. By the way, all these people are innocent because where I come from, you're innocent until proven guilty. But in any case, his family, the Fishermen's Association that he was part of, can all say that he was a fisherman and that's what he was doing. But again, if you want to prove someone's guilty, you need to take them to court. You need to try them. You just don't summarily kill them. So, again, the onus is on the U.S. government here.
Yeah. In any case, the onus is on those who are in the process of trying to prove what someone was or was not doing. I do want to ask you, though, how certain you are that you will see any compensation by suing U.S. officials, in that the client that you have is not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, well, that's not a problem. That's why we brought this before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which gives a venue for non-U.S. citizens within the Western Hemisphere to bring a petition against the United States as a state for various remedies, including compensation. Now, with that said, am I certain they'll get compensation? I mean, whenever you bring a case, you can't be certain of that. But this is an avenue to do that. And I think with this case combined with public pressure, which I think is building against these strikes, I do think we can get them compensation. And I think this case will play a part in ending these killings.
What message is the family trying to send directly to the Department of Defense, to the Defense Secretary, and to ultimately the President of the United States?
I mean, what they're doing is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's legally wrong. At one point, Pete Hegseth even admitted he doesn't even know who's on these boats. And in this case, he didn't know. I hope he didn't know that this was just a fisherman who was killed. And again, they want this to stop. They want the U.S. to live up to its own values as a country that values democracy and due process and human rights. And I think the U.S. has really gone off the rails in terms of these killings. It's really destroyed its status in the world.
Dan Kovalik, thank you for coming on. We'll be following this case. I hope you will stay in touch with us to see what happens, as this is the very first person to come forward to sue under the circumstances that are being looked into now. I do appreciate it.
Right now, lawmakers are demanding answers, and Republicans.
Yeah, that is great, right? I am proud to know Dan Kovalik, right? Because these assassinations that have been carried out, where they're striking boats in the Caribbean, they don't know who the people are. And they just blow a boat up and kill a bunch of people. And they say, oh, well, they were drug dealers. They won't release their names. They won't release any evidence, right? This is wrong. And even if they are drug dealers, if someone's trying to smuggle drugs in the United States, you grab their boat and you put handcuffs on them and you take them to a court and you charge them with being drug dealers. You don't just execute them. We don't have the right to summarily execute people. And in this case, these people are not drug dealers, right? And this family now of a Colombian fisherman is saying, look, what Pete Hegseth did, this is our father, the primary breadwinner. He was part of the Fishermen's Association. He was not a drug dealer, and you were wrong to kill him. And I am proud to know Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik, the reason he's taking this case on is because of the fact that he's got a long history in Colombia, right? He sued Coca-Cola for their crimes against the people of Colombia. He's been involved in the struggle. I mean, they had a brutal military dictatorship in Colombia for many years, the paramilitaries and the death squads. And, so Dan's got history there. I believe he actually knows the former president or the current president, Petro, of Colombia. So, I am really proud to know Dan. I'm really glad that he's doing this. And I'm really glad he had the bravery to go on CNN, which is, a vulturous network, and go on. I think it's probably CNN is having them on because they don't like Trump, right? Because they view Trump as potentially going to sign this deal with Russia. And they want to, do anything to hurt Trump. And so that creates an opening, and good for Dan, right? Dan is right, because the USA doesn't have the right to just blow people out of the water and sink ships just because they say, oh, well, it's a drug dealer, right? Extrajudicial killing, not okay. The drone strike program that started under Bush, continued under Obama, continued under Trump, continued under Biden is illegal. You can't just kill people and say, oh, well, he was a terrorist. No, you have to have a due process, right? You can't, just kill people. But the U.S. government maintains this policy of, oh, if we don't like somebody, we can just kill them. Imagine if Russia did that. Imagine if Russian President Putin was picking out random ships in the ocean, not near Russia, just, random ships in the middle of the ocean and blowing them away and saying, oh, well, the guy was a no good guy. Nobody would stand for that. Imagine that China was doing that. Imagine if China was just, shooting boats in the South China Sea, and then they'd say, oh, well, the person who was there, they were a terrorist, they were a drug dealer. They would never stand for it. What the United States is doing is illegal. And there's a bunch of fake bot accounts on Twitter supporting it. But any Trump supporter that you actually talk to about it, they don't know the facts, right? They just say, oh, well, Trump's killing drug dealers. I think that's great. My cousin died from drugs. And you say, how do you know they're drug dealers? Well, that's what they said. Well, you do realize there's no evidence, right? You do realize that, there's a number, that we don't even have their names. They don't seize the ships. They just declare they know that. And it's just kind of one of their things. Now, would you be okay with the police here just killing people and saying, oh, well, they were drug dealers afterwards, and not ever releasing their names, not ever providing any evidence? I think most Trump supporters, if you talk to them about this, they understand it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is understanding why this is bullshit. And, on top of that, we've got Rand Paul speaking up and saying that it's bullshit. And on top of that, we've got Thomas Massie, a libertarian in Congress, speaking up and saying that it's bullshit. And a lot of Trump supporters realize that this is bullshit. And I'm glad that Dan Kovalik is doing the right thing. He's a very well experienced international lawyer. My hat off to you, Dan. My hat off to you for standing up against illegal murder by Pete Hegseth and by the Marco Rubio faction of the Trump administration, the Miami Mafia, that is trying to undermine the peace process, that wants to escalate against Venezuela and wants to carry out regime change in Venezuela, and is probably trying to undermine the peace process with Russia. We don't know that for a fact, but that seems to be what Scott Ritter and other important analysts believe. So our hat off to you, Dan Kovalik. You're doing important work. Glad to see you on the CNN speaking up. Years ago, I went on CNN one time. They'll never have me back, and I'll talk about that later in the show. But